You're listening to the Paul Young Podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome again to the Paul Young Podcast. I'm going to talk about my friends on death row. In fact, today and the next 3 sessions are focused on them, and the next 3 are actual conversations that I've just had with Terry King and Kevin Burns, 2 of the guys that are my friends on death row. They called me and they had 30 minutes a crack, and we edited it down so that you could have time to listen to them. KB actually did 2 phone conversations and Terry did 1. And we did them back to back. Terry called me, and then 30 minutes later, when he was done, Kevin Burns called me, and then Kevin Burns called me back, all in one day. 2 years ago, the state of Tennessee put a moratorium on executing inmates on death row because someone had discovered they were using drugs that were 5 years past their use-by date. That's a real problem. So they put a moratorium on, re-looked at the whole drug protocol. The Tennessean reported, the newspaper, that to celebrate the conclusion of Christmas, Tennessee has now released a new lethal injection protocol. That statement by itself is just horrible. We don't know anything really other in terms of the protocol than what the Tennessean has reported, and that is it's a single drug pentobarbital protocol. So probably very similar to the one that is used in the past, but there will be litigation to challenge the new protocol. That's showed up, and then really recently, 4 previously stayed executions have been rescheduled to take place this year, and that would include Oscar Smith on May the 22nd, Byron Black on August the 5th, Donald Middlebrooks September 24th, and Harold Nichols on December 11th. Harold, I've talked about in the past. He's the guy that 2 weeks before his execution, before they put a freeze on executions because of the gross error that had happened. But 2 weeks before, I'm at the prison, and Harold walks in the room and looks around and says, steel and concrete have nothing to say about freedom. Freedom is what happens in the heart of a human being. He fully expected that he would be executed, and then it was stayed because of the protocol problems. Also, Purvis, another of my friends there, he was 30 minutes away from the execution when they suspended it. And since then, he's been proven to be innocent. So, just the idea that you could execute innocent people for crimes they did not commit should give everybody pause. Since I've been visiting the guys over the last 6-7 years, 4 of them have been proven to be innocent by changes in DNA work. The one who'd been there the longest was 41 years. Akil is another one who's one of my more closer friends. I've gotten to know him. Akil has been proven to be innocent, and he's now waiting. There's a whole legal journey process in order to get out. He decided that he would wait on death row rather than go into general population because, for the last almost 33 years, he has been on death row, and that's the only real family he's known while the world outside just continues to go and go and go. And now he's proven innocent. There is these 4 guys. There's another 4 or 5 men who had previously filed oppositions to the very fact that they would have any dates scheduled. So those cases are coming up. But of those 4 or 5, Kevin Burns is one of them. And so that concerns us greatly because we all are absolutely convinced that he's innocent, and he's proclaimed his innocence from the very beginning. We are working to get in front of the governor. There's a group of us that are trying to get in front of the governor in order to see if there's a way that we can have a conversation about having KB pardoned or clemency being granted so that he would not be executed. We'll see how that all plays out. I'll keep you posted about that as well. There's going to be lawsuits about the upcoming executions probably for all the inmates, and that could delay dates even further. But at some point, the legal recourse is going to end its work, and we will start to see executions again. And that grieves me greatly, especially as I've gotten to know people. As Terry King once said, proximity changes everything. I think it's in the sequel for The Shack, but at one point, Mackenzie, who has been relating directly to men on death row, he says to Willie, he said, "I'm starting to feel some empathy and it's pissing me off." And Willie's response is, "Yeah, I suppose that's the danger of actually getting to know someone." You know, a lot of times we are angry at people. We have no idea what's going through their lives, what's taking place in their world, what they're having to deal with or face. Out of our ignorance, it's all about us. We're the center of the universe. You know, it's easier to categorize a group of people like those on death row who have been categorized as animals, you know, those animals on death row. And the legal system has no mercy. It just doesn't. If judgment is not wrapped inside of relationship, it reduces itself to law. And law is letter, and it has no inherent mercy at all. We want oftentimes to deal with people, unknown people to us, in terms of the law, because we have no relational connection to them. And so we want the law to come down hard on them without any consideration for what is going on in their worlds, where they've come from, who they are, and their capacity to change. Death row is where you put people to wait to die and where the law has no mercy. You've reached the limit of the law. It's now declared them irredeemable. I wanted to read you just a couple pages. KB, Kevin Burns, and Kevin Riggs. Kevin Riggs is the pastor of the community church in Nashville that has ordained Kevin Burns, properly ordained him through their whole education process and all that. Kevin is actually, I think he's working on a master's degree in theology. He is on a 4-year journey. The first is on the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures. The second is on the New Testament. The third is on the early church fathers. And the fourth is on ethics, or how do we live. And I don't remember if it's half a year for each one. But anyway, that's what he's working on right now. But again, we believe he's innocent. And Kevin Riggs, the pastor, and KB, when Kevin is out of town, KB will fairly regularly preach to the congregation at the church through a 30-minute phone call. I've listened. KB's kind of an old-time preacher guy. He's great. He is so amazing and human about how he talks about the gospel and the praise to Jesus and giving glory to God, and how each day is the best day of his life, which is the title of the book that these two Kevins wrote together. Today, the best day of my life. And you can get it on Amazon, or it's out there. It just came out not too long ago. But it tells Kevin's whole story. There's another book that if you're interested in this whole conversation, it's written by another friend, Joseph Ingle, I-N-G-L-E. It's called Too Close to the Flame. And that title comes from having to watch, actually be present as two men who he had become very close to that had been on death row were both executed. And it just undid him. Too close to the flame. I don't know if you remember Mike Farrell. He was B.J. Honeycutt on MASH back in the day. He is the president of the board of directors of Death Penalty Focus. And he writes a little note about Joe's book. Over 40 years ago, a minister named Joe Ingle came to the set of the TV show MASH to talk to me. He called saying he heard that I was opposed to the death penalty. Days later, there we sat on a hot day on a hot set with actors and camera and crew members and people and noise talking about the state killings. Quote, "There's going to be a bloodbath in this country," he said, because Supreme Court decisions had reopened the floodgates to executions in 38 states that still had the death penalty. I want you to help me stop it. The Reverend Joe Ingle changed my life that day. Joe's almost superhuman dedication and personal sacrifice involved in this pursuit continue to inspire me today. So it's an incredible book, just amazing. And Joe is one of the most compassionate, kind people that I know. Anyway, those two books are out there. Here's a little piece of KB's story I thought I would read to you. It's from Today, the Best Day of My Life, that KB and Kevin Riggs have written. And this is a little bit about his case. You'll get a feeling there's a lot more in the book if you're interested. And this is why, part of the reason, you'll see glimpses as to why we're absolutely convinced that he did not kill anybody. Did not even shoot at anybody. And this is how it goes, on page 44, the paragraph's entitled Disagreements. Two stories, among many, stand out to me about KB's disagreements with his trial lawyers. First, remember on April 20, 1992, KB had short hair and didn't have jury curls? There were plenty of people willing to testify to that fact. After his arrest while in jail, awaiting trial, KB recommitted his life to Jesus, and part of his commitment was promising God he would grow his hair out as a sign of commitment. KB told me, quote, "For me, my hair growing long would symbolize my growing faith in God. I did not cut my hair for 3 years. It wasn't a Nazarite vow. I knew I would eventually cut it, but I kept it long to remind me of my promise to God." The day before trial, KB's lawyers told him he needed to cut his hair in order to make himself more presentable. KB told his lawyers, who are supposed to represent him, about his promise to God and how he could not cut his hair. In anger, one of the lawyers shouted at him, screaming, "Where was your God while you were killing those people?" That was one of his defense attorneys. The second story concerns a deal that KB's lawyers made with a prosecuting attorney without KB's approval. Between the ages of 18 and 20, KB had a few negative experiences with the police. One experience was about his brother's gun that ended up in KB's barber's bag. And if you read chapter 4, it'll explain all that. According to KB, the prosecuting attorney approached KB's attorneys and said, "If you guys don't bring it up that there is no evidence KB fired any guns, I'll not bring up his past run-ins with the police, especially the one that involved a gun." KB's lawyers agreed. We know this is a fact. It's been confessed to be a fact. At KB's trial, the murder weapons were never presented as evidence. KB's jurors never knew that both murder weapons had been recovered at Bobby's house, that's one of the other guys, and KB's fingerprints were not on either of the two murder weapons. So here's a recap. KB, Kevin Burns' trial is complex and at times hard to follow. Here's a recap of the key aspects that demonstrate his innocence. Much of the below was provided by KB's current lawyer, Richard Tennant, who's working very hard. Amazing staff of people who are trying to get somebody to recognize the case as worthy of at least being looked at. April 20th, 92, on the day that things happened, it was KB's 23rd birthday. And he had a bunch of friends that were going to take him to a recording studio because he loved recording music. And on his way to the studio, so these three friends, Joey, Tyus, and Bobby, on the way to the studio, Bobby asked them to back up his cousin Thomas, who needed to squash a problem he had with another guy named David. Bobby had guns, just in case, though he said nothing worse than a fistfight was planned. KB had no intent to use a gun or to hurt anybody. He just wanted to go celebrate his birthday by recording some music. Thomas and Bobby found David, the guy they had the beef with, sitting in the back seat of a parked car with three of his friends. Thomas and Bobby pulled their guns and demanded David exit the car. Instead, he slammed the car door into Thomas and ran. Shots were fired, likely by Thomas and Bobby. In response, after hitting the ground until the shooting was over, KB fled, first to his friend's house, then to his sister's house, and then finally to Chicago, where he was later arrested. Eyewitnesses watched as a big man in glasses went to the driver's side of the car, pulled a .32 automatic pistol, and repeatedly shot the driver, Scott, and backseat passenger, Tracy. Another man with a jerry curl in his hair fired a .32 revolver and killed the front seat passenger, Kenny. 2 men, and only 2 men, fired all the fatal shots. We know beyond a shadow of a doubt that KB was not one of the 2 killers. On April 20th, 1992, KB wore his hair cut close to his scalp, and he stood all of 5'7". Furthermore, Luis, a survivor and an eyewitness, testified at Joey's trial that he and Scott were repeatedly shot by the same big man in glasses. Joey is 6'4" and wears glasses. The .32 automatic pistol that killed Scott and wounded David, and the .32 revolver that killed Kenny were found at Bobby's home. Despite KB's innocence, he, like too many men in Memphis at that time, was misrepresented by unprepared, less than competent defense attorneys. At KB's trial, Tracy changed his story and implicated KB as the man who shot him and Scott. KB's lawyers had a transcript of Tracy's earlier testimony that could have exonerated KB, but they failed to even use it. KB's lawyers could have rebutted Ruth's identification by calling any number of witnesses, including KB's supervisor at the Shoney's restaurant where he worked at the time of the shootings. All of them, and they volunteered to come and do it, all of them have testified that KB's hair was cut to the scalp, but defense counsel did nothing at all. At sentencing, based on the conclusion that KB had killed Scott, the jury sentenced him to death. For the murder of Kenny, which the prosecution contended was committed by someone else, for that one, they sentenced KB to life. So he had a death sentence and a life sentence. KB's life conviction and death sentences are an absolute travesty of justice. KB and Thomas were all tried independently of each other. Since the trials, the following events have occurred. Once again, the information below is supplied by Richard Tennant. Joey, the big man in glasses, made parole in April 2023, a week after KB was denied relief by the United States Supreme Court. Thomas, whose altercation with Scott started this whole tragedy, made parole in 2017. Bobby, who provided guns for a fistfight, was never prosecuted. Despite it all, KB became an ordained minister. He preaches regularly at Franklin Community Church, where KB's friend and mentor, Kevin Riggs, pastors. With the help of Pastor Riggs, KB started a church on death row called the Church of Life, where he holds regular services. He gets discouraged sometimes, but he doesn't really show it. And he always says, today is the best day of my life. And he's been there now. This fall, it'll be 33 and a half years. He is one of the most beautiful people I've ever known in my life. Now, that's who you're going to see. And he had just gotten the news that they had started putting men back on death watch or, scheduling for executions. And I talked to him soon after that, so you'll hear that kind of intensity in his voice. But first up, you're going to hear Terry King. Terry King's been on death row 38 years, I think. You'll hear the voice of a transformed human being. He was 18, and he's spent most of his life now on death row. Well, that's my introduction, and I hope I don't know if enjoy is the right word, but it is an education, and I hope your hearts get touched by listening to the voices of my two friends, Terry King and Kevin Burns.